What are you annoyed about at work? Or what takes you a lot of time? And can you build something for that? I don't think designers have really, fully taken advantage of that. And I don't really think companies have fully taken advantage of the skills that designers can bring to that table. Just talking about designers applying their craft to AI projects, and I think it's a very untapped market. But if you are a digital designer who's building software, it is a big advantage to understand code. The more that you can tell the story, the closer to the end deliverable, the better. Now is that you have so many different tools at your disposal for free, really, to learn, and it's really based on how do you learn best. The sad thing is there's a lot of layoffs in the past couple of years, and design tech jobs have been pretty hard hit by it. And the teams that don't have their goals aligned with the corporate strategy, the business strategy, are often the teams that get cut. If you are seeing that your team's goals do not align with the company's goals, well, that's a big problem. That's a red flag. And I think you need to raise your voice and say, this is a potential problem, and understand why.
Would you mind telling a little bit about what you do now?
Hey, great to be here. Really, really excited and happy to be part of this show. My name is Emerson Taymor. I'm the SVP of Design at a company called InfoBeans. We help companies design and build software. A lot of what I do today is really around kind of helping companies figure out, how do you take advantage of AI? How do you use AI in your processes in the product that you already have? And my thesis is that design can play a really big role in doing that. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing is trying to spread the gospel of design to large enterprises, medium enterprises, startups, and how it can help companies.
Do you identify yourself more as a designer or more as an entrepreneur?
I consider myself a bit of an explorer. I'm always tinkering. I'm always learning. But yes, I would say an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I've built many businesses, invested in businesses. I'm at InfoBeans because I ran a design consultancy product studio for 11 years before it was acquired by InfoBeans now 5 years ago. So my role is still in this kind of mix of design, sales, thought leadership, I would say. But yes, I am always tinkering with new ideas, new projects. And so I think at heart, I'm still an entrepreneur.
How did you get into design?
I always think back on it. I think I really started off as I was very into photography as a kid. I was very fortunate to go to some schools that had great photography programs. My mom really liked photography and my parents liked art. So went to a lot of museums. I grew up in San Francisco. So I think there was like this tech aura around me in the kind of early 90s and, through the late 90s. And so I always had this sense of, I was always tinkering, with different things. And when we got our first computer with the dial-up and beep, 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 and like looking at different ways to do things. I built my first website using, in middle school, really using a Microsoft Front Page, which was kind of like a WYSIWYG editor, a very, very early way to do things. And then I was kind of building websites and with Macromedia Dreamweaver and Flash. And so I was kind of tinkering around, teaching myself Photoshop, teaching myself these skills. But I think I would keep coming back to photography at its core. And I think so early on, a lot of my websites were like showcasing my photography work out there in high school or doing little freelance projects that I did. But I just got exposed to a lot of that stuff throughout. And then in high school, I was applying to colleges and, again, using my portfolio. So I was looking at what was out there, different design schools, different art schools, different, traditional liberal arts schools. Ended up going to UCLA and their design media arts department. But I think through that process, I was through high school. And really the reason I settled on design or I got interested in design was I like photography, but I like film, but the art, I think there's always this balance of like, okay, well, how are you going to make money in arts? It's tough. Like, are you going to be a photographer? You can be a photographer in like advertising, maybe in that world, product photography. And that was a career that I was perusing early on. But I think that photography, but with like, how do you make money with it, was always something that was there. So I think that was how I ended up in design as a field. And I went to, and design school. I think on the other side, I was always, I don't know if I was entrepreneurial to an extent, building lemonade stands as a kid, baking cookies, selling them on the street in San Francisco. Then I was doing a lot of freelance work, literally as a young kid, I was like designing birthday party things for other kids, parents, and whatnot. I was, building websites, again, very early website days, like finding jobs on Craigslist and building them for people. So I was always just kind of like tinkering around and building this stuff. I didn't really have a more traditional job in high school. I was just really doing this kind of like freelance type work. And I continued doing that through college. So I think those were the two worlds kind of coming together a little bit. I was like, okay, what am I passionate about? Photography, design. How do I make money from this? Doing freelance stuff. And that was kind of the heart of it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm assuming like as someone who's very new, for example, for web design and development, how did you find the resources back then?
I think just like anyone does, if anything, it's easier now, maybe with more advances on the web. But, I remember going to message boards and taking web tutorials. it was really before the days of YouTube, I would say, like at least as a discovery mechanism for learning. So I wish now I do a lot of like learning stuff on like YouTube or asking ChatGPT, but back then it was really just like message boards, asking people, seeing tutorials that people had done like on web pages. Of course, books were a big one, right? Of getting your kind of web design wow and kind of your, Macromedia for Dummies. So a lot of those books, I would say, of looking through those, tinkering, and then just like anything, which I think goes back to that photography mindset, a lot of it's just trial and error, right? It's taking a lot of extra shots, developing them, seeing how those ones come out, maybe changing how you're developing them. And so there's a lot of just kind of guess and check work. Not to say that there's any right answer, but you're just testing things and seeing where it.
Back then, if say like something doesn't work, even after multiple tries, did you have times where you kind of like almost want to give up?
Oh yeah, but I think that's with anything, right? I think that was always, and even, a big one was, there would be many late nights especially in design school, I would say, where you would be, there's a project. And we did design media arts at UCLA was a very much of a multimedia thing. It wasn't just like, traditional commercial design. So we had things like working in the wood shop. We had, one of the professors created processing, which is a big programmatic art language, I would say. So there's lots of things where it was kind of these multimedia, more media art type installations. And I would always have these very grandiose visions of what I wanted. And then I would get in there in the lab and it was not always come out to my vision. Very frustrating. And even that was, I would say, even as a kid, I remember doing some like school projects, like in middle school where I really had these like ambitious ideas for like, we had to do something in San Francisco, like with Wells Fargo, with like the old Wells Fargo, like horse and buggy things. And so we were I was trying to build something and it just did not come to my expectations. So sometimes my imagination was further along than my prowess, my technical skills, which was a little frustrating. And so, yeah, definitely, you always get a little frustrated, throw your hands up in the air and give up for that project maybe, or you run out of time, right? The deadline, the school assignments due, like you can only take it so far and then you go from there.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like as a designer, I still experience a moment where I feel like my ability doesn't really match what I'm trying to get.
Always.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, because you have back then, there is obviously you look for books and look for a resource to help you to learn. But now, like you mentioned earlier, there's YouTube. There's also different courses online, free or paid. For someone who wants to, for example, build their own like a project or maybe build even like just a website with no experience, but they're afraid of starting, what would you say to them?
Just start. I think with anything, right? I think now, there's always resources available. There's classes, there's experts that you could ask. There was, books you said. So there's always been different ways of learning. And I think now there's many modals of learning and many free things or very cheap ways of learning. So part of it, I think, is understanding from personally what's the best way that you learn as an individual. And that's, I think, the beauty now is that you have so many different tools at your disposal for free, really. To learn. And it's really based on how do you learn best? Are you the type of person who wants to read a book? Are you the type of person that wants to go to a physical classroom and learn? Are you the type of person that wants to take a Udemy or Coursera self-driven course, or Maven now has a cohort-based courses? Or do you just want to go on YouTube? But I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is you just got to apply that knowledge. I think you can read all the books. I read a lot. I don't always apply it. You forget it. You have to apply what you're doing. And especially when you're thinking about something new, coding, learning AI, building a website, it's around how do you actually apply that to the work and just do it. It sounds a little bit cheesy, but I don't think you can truly learn this stuff unless you get your hands a little dirty and just go ahead and execute against it.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like you are suggesting, first of all, find out a way that's best for you to learn, and then create opportunities to practice those things you learn.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people sometimes get stuck on that piece of like, oh, well, what is a thing I do? And there's just so many opportunities out in the world to do something. If you think about software, especially what is a problem? What is a pain point that you have as an individual? It doesn't have to be a business, right? It's like, what do you annoyed about at work, or what takes you a lot of time? And can you build something for that? Or if you want to build a website, well, build a personal website. You've got your LinkedIn, but why not build a website for you and who you are, podcast, right? So it's like okay, you're struggling with that, but go out and say, okay, well, what's a website that exists, or what's a product that you use and you don't like, or you think could be better, and just redesign that, or redesign a feature from that, or rebuild a feature from that. So there's so much out there. And I think the idea, it's really more of, if anything, it's analysis paralysis. So just pick something, put something in a ChatGPT and say, okay, pick a random number, give me 20 ideas, and it gives you idea 13, pick idea 13 and go with it. And then see what happens. If it sucks after a week or 2 weeks, then move on to something else. But at least you started. I
want to jump into talking a little bit about your work now. Many years ago, you built the agency, and then you eventually sold the agency. And in reflection, what is a part of the work that you do now at InfoBeans that you feel like you really enjoy doing?
Well, I think it's a lot of the same. I think within any acquisition, any selling of a company, there's always a lot of risk, right? I think you go as an entrepreneur to having complete control over everything. That's a lot of opportunity. That's also a lot of stress. And a reason for maybe selling is you have a lot of stress in terms of you got to make payroll, you've got to make your rent payments and all these things. But you also have a lot of every decision, every hire, everything you want to do, you also have a lot of control. And also it's your brand, it's your baby, so to speak. And so you see a lot of acquisitions where I think, there's friction between the company that was purchased and the purchasing company. There's maybe a mismatch in terms of culture and alignment. And so I think in many ways, and I was very fortunate, and that was part of the process, obviously, was finding a company that was going to be aligned philosophically. But I was very fortunate that philosophically, culturally, there was a lot of overlap between those two organizations. And so I think that has been, they've been great as a team. Like I'm still there, obviously, 5.5 years in, and they give me a lot of trust and a lot of ability to kind of do what I like to do within that. So I think that's very fortunate. I think I've seen a lot of friends, companies get acquired, and not only agencies, any business, and you just see that it doesn't always work out that way. But I think in terms of what I like to do is much the same. I think, again, it goes back to being a bit of an explorer, a bit of a problem solver. And that means like, okay, what's a problem? How do we actually solve this with our clients? So I love working with our clients and to figure out what those problems might be. This morning I was on a call with the startup that's just looking to get an MVP out there and build something quick. And so kind of riffing live of like, what are the features that we can pare down? What are the features that we could put in to maybe get this thing out there a little bit better? Last week, I was talking with a potential private equity company about using AI in some of their processes. And so again, it's always around these new ideas around how do we take advantage? How do we solve these things and get the most bang for the buck? I like delivering business results for our clients. And so I like thinking creatively, thinking strategically around how do we actually achieve those results. And so I would say that is something I really like. The other big thing, which goes back to the beginning, is these days, especially with AI, the heart of everything I do, or what everyone does in the world, right? I think there's still a very big problem around the actual results of AI. And so my thesis, I'm sure we'll get into this a bit later, is really that AI is not a technical problem in many ways, it's a design problem. And design is a solution to a lot of the mismatch in terms of expectations and alignment that people are seeing right now in the industry. And so let's get designers at a seat at the table and helping solve those problems so we actually can see those results. So that is a mission of mine right now, but that's also a lot of, I would say, education within clients, within organizations, thinking about AI, thinking about design is not always thought in that way. And so that's something that I'm trying to beat the drum on slowly but surely, but it's going to be a process.
I'm really curious about what's the most effective way to do that, especially if you are coming from not within the company. For the company you're working with, you're more coming from as someone who they hired. What's the most effective way to make them realize that designer actually have the capacity to solve the problem they are experiencing?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the sad reality is designers kind of screwed it up the last 5 years. We were, of course, a part of that. I would take accountability for that as well. But, designers have been, we want to see the table. They got a seat at the table in many ways, and they didn't necessarily deliver the results that were expected from a business perspective. And so I think the number one thing is you need to understand what the language of business people think. It's money. At the end of the day, it's money. We can talk a big game about user empathy and what do customer experience, but businesses care about profit. They care about the dollars in the bank account. Now, I think any good designer would argue that, and probably rightfully so, when you look at the math, companies that invest in good design are typically more profitable. They typically have stickier customers and all these things. So I think that is a story that can be told and should be told. But I think the issue is many designers got in and started being a little too preachy about process, a little too preachy about, we need to do user testing here, and empathy mapping, user personas, and not thinking about what is the business impact of the work that we're doing. And so I think, and I think and it's not entirely the designer's fault too. They're representing, and they should represent that user side of things. Product is really meant to represent also the business and be that intersection. But there's a lot of kind of, I would say, confusion in many organizations around the role, like where the roles of designers and product, there's a lot of overlap, which is a whole nother topic of conversation. But I think at the end of the day, it's business. You have to, designers need to translate the work that they're doing into the business metrics. And so when I think of you want to see at the table, you need to speak in terms of who are the people at the table who are going to fund your projects, who are going to give those projects the green light, and you got to put together the business case. So the business case side of things is a very important skill to develop, both in terms of how do you develop the business case, how do you update it, and then also how do you tell that story to the different people sitting at the table to get them to understand what the materials are. And that story might have to change if you're talking to the CEO versus the CFO versus the CXO, the Chief Experience Officer. So the story is not always the same, but I think that is a very important piece, is thinking about how are the metrics that you're doing. Okay, you did the user testing, and now we want to show after you did this, what were the changes in the metrics? What were the changes in the analytics? And then what was that line to the end business goal, the end business strategy? What are the goals for the year? Is it to decrease attrition rate, improve retention by 5x or 5%? What factors did you do that directly, contributed to that? And so it's tough. It's not easy to do. And also I think designers are stretched thin. They don't always have access to the analytics and the metrics to tell that story. Sadly, most companies do not have good metrics and analytics even set up. So it's not even easy or possible to tell that story. But I think those are the pieces that, then you have to kind of fudge it a little bit. But you do need to really tell that story, I would say, effectively.
Yeah, I very much agree with what you said. Say like in a team where, for example, they know nothing about the business. If they want to develop this skill or mindset, how can they integrate that goal into their design process?
So the first, I think it's a great question. And I think that you can, if you need to ask ChatGPT or do some research, part of it is doing research, right? On what are the company's goals? Most of the time, there's going to be some sort of goals that the CEO or the leader of the organization, the head administrator, whatever it ends up being, says, here are the goals for the year. There's some all hands or some communication that there's some goal for the year. Maybe there's not. If there isn't, that's a bit of a problem. And a designer should ask those questions and ask their team lead, ask their manager to find that out. And then it usually trickles down. You have your company goal, then you have your team goals, or you have where, are you, a little bit will depend on where you as a designer roll up in the organization. Some designers are going to roll up into marketing. Some are going to roll up into, not many roll up into IT, I would say, but some will maybe roll up in IT. Some are going to be in business lines, right? So you're in a line of business, and so your line of business is going to have goals. So you want to think about what are the company's strategic vision and goals? What are your team's goal? What are your roll-up team's goal? And that's going to help give you a sense of like what's important. And I think, and I would say, if you are seeing that your team's goals do not align with the company's goals, well, that's a big problem. That's a red flag. And I think you need to raise your voice and say, this is a potential problem, and understand why the goals do not align. Because the reality is, if your goals don't align, and the sad thing is there's a lot of layoffs in the past couple of years, and design tech jobs have been pretty hard hit by it. And the teams that don't have their goals align with the corporate strategy, the business strategy, are often the teams that get cut. So you really want to make sure that what you're doing on your team is aligned to the business goals, so that you can protect yourself in the case that something goes south in the business, or they need to cut costs. You don't want to be on the chopping block, obviously. But I think it's about asking questions. One of the amazing things is a good designer is very intuitive. They're very curious. And so I think these are things that they'll naturally kind of pick up on. But you need to, don't be afraid to ask if you don't know.
Yeah. I really like how you described it earlier. If your, management doesn't have those answers, that's not a good sign. Like you find out along the way.
And look, it's a lot of companies don't have it, or a lot of teams don't have those goals. Like that is a sad reality, but I think that is a bit of a red flag. And if you're in that position, I think you maybe need to start looking for, get your name out on a job posting potentially, or see, is that really true? Like, it will. And then if you really fall back on it, it's just going to be profit and loss at the end of the day, right? And so that is a very simple, at the most basic level, it's a very simple number. What can we do to get more money in, increase revenue? What can we do to decrease costs? And so then you look at what are things that could do that? Or if you're in a nonprofit, it might be around how do you drive more impact? How do you serve more people with what you're doing? And how do you make people more effective at what they're doing so you can ultimately serve more people? That might be cutting costs in certain areas by automating things. That might be making a process more effective for people. But I think, I would say, especially as a designer, usually designers are pretty good at like understanding processes, seeing where there's bottlenecks and whatnot. If you can find areas to improve workflows, make them more efficient, you're going to be in pretty good shape.
I have a question that's relevant to what you said. In the job search process, how do you think they could articulate their value in a project that doesn't achieve the outcome that's the best?
Yeah, and look, the reality is most projects do fail. Whether you have the best possible team working on, there's all sorts of things that are often outside the control even of the team, let alone the designer on the team. So I think most people will recognize that part of things. So I think there's a couple things. One, you have to also realize, I think a lot of designers don't, that most case studies that companies put out there, they've spun them, right? You go to a conference talk, it's not all as amazing as is shown on the screen. There's always a bit of a sugar coating around it, even if they're telling the tough parts. So I think one is telling the best story that you can, showing the best outcome that you can without lying, of course, but what are the things that you did that did improve, that you know you improved? Okay, you don't have the metrics, but you did some user testing, and this is some of the qualitative feedback that you got back. Or you have a quote from some senior person that you presented to at some point that was really positive. Or there was an element of like, hey, we had these challenges, but you're proud of the piece that was executed in this way. So I think there's always a good positive story and spin to be told on anything. And then I think you can be, I would not necessarily say, hey, let's throw this company under the bus and say, oh, because no one really likes a negative Nancy in the interview process. So I think it's more about like, okay, how do you kind of be positive about what happened and realistic that, hey, this didn't make it out, but we learned this along the way. Here are some of the things we learned along the way, and here's maybe what I would have done different if I was to redo it. I think that also that kind of reflection point is really important for people.
But just to make sure I understand correctly, say like if you are sitting across a table to a designer who's looking for a job at your company, and if they have such a project, which say like they failed or maybe like they got laid off, there's no result to show, maybe they fight with the company like in the process, what would be part of the story that would really capture your attention that you think you would make you think that they're a good designer?
Well, I think it would be, a good question. I think it's around how do you say what were the learnings from it, right? I think with all this stuff, I have a podcast that I do called Fail Faster, and part of it is everyone out there has done projects that don't go to plan. But you learn from it. And it's about how do you learn, how do you adapt? I think that human component is really important. That adaptability is really important. And especially as a designer, when we're trying to do things in tough ways. So I think the things that I would look at is what on the project did we do? Did we change as we were going through the project that worked better than we expected? So one, like how did you adapt as the project was going when things weren't going right? So that would be one. Two is reflecting back on that project. What would you do differently? Knowing all that it didn't go as well as you planned, but that's great. That's a learning for you. So how would you redo that project? Still maybe being realistic about what are the constraints that exist. I think this is an important piece because again, there are constraints within any project that you're working on, especially as a designer. So you can't go in and say, oh, I wish if I was to do it again, I would just say, oh, this stakeholder has no feedback on it. Okay, that's not really realistic in terms of what's going to happen in an organization. So, but I think it's around, okay, what would you do different given the constraints, given the requirements of the organization? There's definitely going to be things that you would do different. I mean, if there is, whether even if the project was super successful, there are going to be things that you would do different. And I would say if there's nothing you would do different, then maybe there's a problem potentially. Maybe you need to reevaluate it and really see, is there really nothing you would do different? Because that is concerning.
We talked about AI a little bit earlier, and there are so many launches in this past 2-3 weeks, and AI will really change how we work, play, learn, shop, and connect. How do you think these changes would shift how we define a designer's role?
That's a big one. I really believe that designers are going to play a really important role, more important than ever, in the future of AI, because I think AI has not been able to capture the full value because of the lack of designers maybe within the tools. I also think because AI is going to makes things easier to create, whether it's coding, whether it's content, that design touch, the design craft, the design kind of style is going to be a differentiator. Customer experience, UX is going to be a differentiator more and more because you're going to have a lot more feature parity around companies, around services. So the craft element, the taste element, the cultural skills of a designer are going to be an even more important skill in the coming, years and weeks ahead. And I think just in general, like the designer's kind of intuitive, the nose, the belief of the end user, what does the end user want, is very important when you just have people maybe plugging things into an LLM and getting a response back and just executing against it. So where you have that taste and you have that kind of knowledge of what is going to make your company's user, the people who use your company, what are they going to really want? What are they going to value? And then how do you differentiate that is going to be a very important skill. And designers should be able to really shape that.
Would you mind to elaborate a bit more on the taste? What is a designer's taste and how does it show?
Yeah, I think the most obvious way of how it would show would maybe be visual design, right? And what does it look like? That would be the thing that most people would recognize. And I think that's always tough because obviously design, visual design is subjective. But I think that detail, that level of polish is going to become something that companies are going to, again, differentiate on because it's going to be a lot easier to build out a very shoddy version of a feature. And so what are the features that are well designed, very thoughtful, effortlessly flow together? I think that is going to be, where great designers are going to, make their mark. And I think where companies will kind of also, make their mark. If we think of the iPhone and the simplicity of doing things and kind of that as like, a classic example of a curated experience that was well thought through and executed. That was from a designer's mind and eye with Johnny Ives and Steve Jobs originally.
Do you have any suggestions for designers to develop the taste?
I think hopefully they have some. If they're a designer, right? But I think it's around just getting, being creative is something is always key. It's like going to a museum, going to the cinema, going for a walk in the park, curating what do you like? Like what are the things that you see in the world? When you go to a bookstore and you see a book cover that you really like, or you go on a website and you browse and you see what are the experiences that you really like, whether it's on Dribbble or awards or whatever it ends up being. But just see, I think taste comes in so many, you can get inspiration in so many ways, going to a fashion store in Soho, flipping through a fashion magazine. So I think that it's just around exposing yourself into different things, right? I think that's an important part is like different, not all, I'm not just going on the web and just browsing a website. I'm going to the real world and seeing things. I'm going to a new country, perhaps seeing how they're using things out there. So I really believe that all of those, the world views make a better designer.
I think the opportunities of going outside, like outside the apartment, and then going to see the real things like the bookshop, museums, you see the real thing, and then sort of like you're interacting with all these objects, and then you sort of find out what you like.
Exactly. No, you're totally right. Yeah, and it is. It's like, how do you, and you can do that. I think the beauty of, I mean, we're obviously fortunate. Both of us are in New York City, which is, arguably one of the best places in the world, to do all of that stuff and to get inspiration. We have, so many things, but no matter where you are, right, there's always a park that you can go to. There's always a coffee shop that you can just sit and observe different people coming in and out. What are they doing? So I think there's always ways to do that, even if you're in a little more of a remote situation.
Yeah, absolutely. AI is changing a lot of things. And what are the underexplored opportunities for designers?
Oh, that's a good one. I think a big thing I just want to, keep hammering, because I just don't, and again, this is something I'm trying to beat the drum on within organizations. So I don't think it's a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. But again, it goes back to, I think designers have the toolkit to really solve a lot of these AI problems. I think one thing I've been seeing with a lot of leaders that I speak to is AI projects are really failing or not getting past the pilot experimentation phase for three major reasons. There's data, there's concerns about your data, like it's not set up properly, it's not structured properly, or they just don't trust data sending to the model companies. There's the ROI side of things. So it could cost a lot. Am I going to see an ROI on this? And that's partially because a lot of the projects to date haven't shown an ROI. And then there's the trust side of things, which I think encompasses both data and cost, in that people are a little bit skeptical of AI. They don't necessarily want their data, their information sent to the foundational model companies like Anthropic, like OpenAI, like Google, like Microsoft, et cetera. And if you're a big company with a lot of important data, you're not going to want to just give that away. You can't give that away. That's a key piece of it. And then I think the another big thing with trust is that end users are not very comfortable with AI. And there's a few reasons for that. There's a lot of negative press about AI replacing their jobs. There's a lot of, doomers about, AI is going to take over the world. There's also, I think, it's not a conventional interface to put something into a chat box and get an information back. I mean, you have Google, of course, but you definitely are not used to a magical thing of prompting and prompt engineering. That's not really a way that people get it. And then I think another thing with that is they get information back and it's maybe wrong, so they don't trust it, or it's very mid, it's like very average. And so that kind of is negative impression for people. And so I think these are all things, when I think of this, it all comes down to trust. It really comes down to trust. And I think designers, and I'm trying to kind of create this design-led AI process, but designers have a real great case of one, okay, how do we select the right use case? Workshopping, right? It's like there's a lot of great workshops that you can do to figure out how do you identify business or use cases for AI that are going to, again, align to those business goals that we talked about. And then how do you think about where within those different use cases, how do you prioritize them? Again, you can go back to your, design, workshopping roots of impact mapping, prioritization techniques. We're doing some prioritization around kind of data availability and readiness and people readiness. And so ultimately, you're really thinking about, from a design perspective, how are we going to get to an outcome faster? And I think, again, that ties back to what good designers do, is like, how do we get, whether it's MVP, a prototype, how do we get something built as quickly as possible? What's the lean thing that we can do to get that thing? So that, I would say, step one. Step two is, okay, now we have the idea. So we've built the business case so we can get that buy-in that we talked about earlier. Now, how do we use the kind of traditional design techniques and models to get that trust across? And so again, qualitative one-on-one user interviews is a great way to get trust. And that's something we've been doing on projects for 8 years now, is really when you're thinking about doing your one-on-one interviews, one of the big things to measure ideas out, measure insights out, is on this kind of 2x2, where one axis is understanding to confusion and one axis is the perception, negative to positive. And so you start to see, like, okay, where things people understand and they have a positive perception of it, that means it's validated. Where things are maybe positive, but they're confused, well, that's a UX clarity issue. You get into things where people have a negative perception and they're confused. That means that maybe there's some UX work that needs to be done, but there's also probably some change management that needs to be done. And then you get into this upper left quadrant, which is they understand it, but they have a negative impression of it. And that means, again, you probably have job security issues in that particular area. So you need to either do change management, or you need to kind of think about the UX side of things so it isn't as confusing within that piece. So I think, again, that's a piece that, again, designers are very good at. I think you can marry that with the quantitative eval testing. They're going to have to work with engineers on that piece, but you need to do the mix of the qual and the quant on this stuff, especially around LLMs, where there's hallucinations and whatnot. And then you can think about other techniques. We've over the years developed a workshop called empathy mapping for the machine, confusion mapping for the machine. But these are all things that I think designers are well suited for in terms of thinking about, where do things go wrong? What is the machine going to tell the person? What are they going to communicate back? And how do we build trust in those moments? And then you launch it. And again, you have designers thinking about, is it a diary study? Is it, some of these other monitoring type things that designers can participate in. So I think designers are very well situated to play that end-to-end role and to deliver that value and beat that trust challenge, which I think is ultimately plaguing all of these AI projects, especially not helping them get to production. And then of course I think there's all sorts of UX improvement things that can be done, so you're avoiding the prompt engineering madness, and it does feel a little more magical. I really think that that's just talking about designers applying their craft to AI projects, and I think it's a very untapped market. And I don't think designers have really fully taken advantage of that, and I don't really think companies have fully taken advantage of the skills that designers can bring to that table.
And you mentioned about Lean UX before. What is Lean UX?
Yeah, so I think at its core, this Lean UX is really around how do you test things? How do you learn with the lowest fidelity deliverable possible? That's at least my take on it. And how do you get user feedback as early in the process as possible to point you in the right direction? So that could be, understand that what that is. What is that the lowest fidelity deliverable possible? Really depends on the scenario that you're in and what your confidence level is in the idea. That could be a user interview, no design, nothing. That could be, that you maybe have very little confidence. You don't know much about the space. You need to do a user interview or a jobs to be done style interview. That could be actual working software that's actually polished and built. And that is the right deliverable level for that concept or for that idea. So it's a bit of I think it's around thinking about how do you, and ultimately that's, again, just a problem solving technique, and that's one piece of a larger framework by Josh Seiden and Jeff Gothell that really kind of published the book on it and helped frame it up, and much larger community. But I think at its core, it's around small, balanced teams working together to solve problems. And they do that by bringing the user into the feedback loop as early as possible, and early as possible depends on what the idea is.
And have you always been using this approach?
Yes and no. I think, obviously I think it was popularized, in the, 2014, 2012 era. I don't know the exact date that it really got going. We started Philosophie in 2008. We did not know about Lean UX before doing it. I did not know about Lean UX. And then we, I think, met that community in 2012, 2013, 2014. Don't remember the date around it. And that really resonated with us, and what the community was sharing and their approach to building software really resonated with us as a team. And so we really adopted that philosophy, really, really deeply ingrained in what we did. Not every project was able to use it, because sometimes we were just doing engineering work, other times we were just doing design work, but we always tried to think about how do we get something that we can learn from as quick as possible.
I actually am curious about why the idea of Lean UX really resonated with you at the time in 20.
I think that the key for it was this. It was when we were early on in the agency days. You're really going to be pushing and executing as much as we did. And we didn't really know very much at all. We were building things as we went. We were learning, UX, design, technology, really as we went. We were just out of college as we were building this thing. And so one thing that we were always dealing with small budgets. That was always a constant. And I think a lot of times in the sales process, we would always be working with clients, and we always had this kind of perception that you don't need to build as much. Get something out there, get feedback on it, and see what it was. But we didn't necessarily have the vocabulary around that. And then Eric Ries published The Lean Startup, and that gave us, and it's a controversial book, especially looking back now. A lot of people have negative thoughts on it, but I think at the time that was valuable, because a lot of companies would come to us and they would say, we want to build all this. We would tell them in the sales process, you don't need to build all this. They would like that in the sales process, because they're like, oh, this company is not trying to nickel and dime, trying to get every dollar out of us. They're telling us to build less. So that was good. Like in the sales process, they felt like we were a genuine people. We were on their team. But then we got into the builds, and there would still be maybe this desire to do more. And even if it was like with Lean Startup, that was like a vocabulary around it, but people would still be like, well, we need this in our MVP. Well, and then the other thing that was happening this time was Agile was gaining, a lot of traction and interest, and we were doing a lot of Agile work, but there was a lot of confusion over how does design and engineering work together in the Agile process. Agile really was more from a software engineering perspective originally, and so this intersection of design and engineering was a challenge within Agile, at least, so there was a lot of people, and that's how we ultimately discovered, I would say, the Lean UX community, because they were, I think, at the forefront of that intersection of design and tech. And so going back to like, okay, we're building all this stuff, but a client wants to build X feature. We're not sure about that feature. We say you should launch without it. But at the end of the day, the client's paying you, you're saying, okay, they want us, you can only push back so far. And so you would keep building it. And so that would lead to some frustrations, I would say, on our team in terms of, okay, well, we're building all these features, but we're not seeing the business results of them. We just need to get it out. And so there was some like frustration there with the team. And when we found Lean UX, what was really cool was that it was saying like, well, what can you get out and get in front of 5 users, get feedback from 5 users in one-on-one interviews, or 10 users, and have that inform what to build. And so now you got into this process where it's like, okay, well, client wants to do this. Team is like, I don't think we should do that, but that's not a good idea. well, can we just design a prototype of particular of that feature and put it in front of 5 users and get their feedback on it in one-on-one interviews? And what you saw was that, okay, some of the time the client's idea would come back and the people would not like it. They would say very clearly that they didn't like it. And so now it was not he said, she said versus, client versus agency. It was the end user, the person who's ultimately going to be using this is giving that feedback. That was very impactful for the client. And on the flip side, you would have situations where people say, oh, that's amazing. I want that thing. And that would then give the team that was building it confidence. They would then be excited about like, well, now it's not just the client, like this client who's the highest paid opinion person in the room is telling me to build this thing. Now I'm hearing that the people are going to want this thing. So that was really, I think, empowering for the team and designers and engineers to hear that. It's not just like I'm just building all these features at the whims of a client. It's really here's the end user, and they really are saying, yes, this is a good idea. So I think that was very empowering for both our clients and our team. And then the other thing that it unlocked was now you're trying to move things along with like, okay, can we sketch something on a whiteboard? And that's enough. And then start building off the whiteboard sketch. And so you moved into these much lighter weight but faster cycles where you could get engineering and design in a better agile cadence that I think goes back to a little bit more the heart of the Agile Manifesto. And so that was a very big unlock for us, and I think enabled us to really build a lot of amazing software very, very fast as well, and do it in a way that the team was excited, our clients were excited. And so I think that was really powerful.
In your agency at the time, limited budget, what's the business benefit of adopting that at the time?
I mean, I think that the benefit of Agile and Lean UX is that if you're doing it right, and I think unfortunately a lot of this has become bastardized over the years, and it's just a way to build more features faster. But the end goal is, how do we build what people want, and how do we improve our odds of success of having those business results? There's a lot of waste in software. Just building feature after building feature is not good. In the long run, you have a lot of technical debt and all this stuff. And so can you find out before you build software, can you find out if someone wants that feature? And nip it in the bud a lot earlier, learn a lot earlier in the process so you aren't accumulating tech debt, you aren't accumulating UX rot as the interface gets more and more complicated because you have all these features that no one is using. They use 5 features, but you have all these, and once a feature is launched, no one ever rolls it back. So that at its core is that you're building the right features earlier in the process, and you have more confidence that you're building the right features before you invest in building them.
You mentioned when you were building the agency, you were just out of college with your friend. And what motivates you to build the agency?
Yeah, well, it was funny. We were both doing freelance work in college. He was actually a few years ahead of me. So I was still in college at UCLA, and he was out. So he was moonlighting. So we were just like, let's team up and see where this goes. I was originally planning after college to move to New York and work in advertising. I put those plans on hold to start the agency. We built it up in LA. So it was very much let's try this out, see where it goes. We did not have any grand plans necessarily.
What was it like co-founding a company with your friend? I'm asking because I have experience of like working on a project with a friend, but that didn't work very well.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's very hard. I think, we as there were ebbs and flows, and there was definitely times where our friendship maybe took a turn, like it negatively affected our friendship by being in this business together. And then we're lucky that we both are great friends still today, but it didn't impact us in the long haul. But I think it is very tough for sure, or it's an added challenge of building something with a friend because there are going to be disagreements. On the flip side, I think it also had a lot of advantages early on because I think there was a lot of trust between the two of us, and no one took advantage of that trust. And so I think there was a lot of things that we were able to do individually, and that really propelled us and propelled the business in many ways because we had that inherent trust of each other that maybe wouldn't have been there if it was a friend of a friend or some connection in different ways. And so I think that was a good plus side of it. But I will just say in general for people, I mean, starting a business is I mean, you mentioned it. So, starting a business is no joke. I love entrepreneurship. I think it's an amazing thing, but also it is very intense. And it's not really the glamorized life that I think a lot of maybe the magazines make it out to be and whatnot. And so I do think you have to recognize that going in, and it is not going to be all gravy train. There are going to be these tough moments, and there is no doubt that it is going to impact the personal friendship level. It is going to make an impact on that friendship. It changes the dynamic around a little bit too. And so, not to say you can't end up being great friends, but there's going to be times where it puts a strain on that friendship. And if you're not prepared for that, then at least know that it might be there. And I think it's important to acknowledge that up front. Embrace and I think the important thing, right, with anything is like, if you know that there's going to be those challenges, then it's like, okay, look, we'll have this fight. It's like maybe you're in a relationship, you have a fight with your partner, but you get out the other side, you grow better for it. It connects you stronger in the end. So I think all of that is good. But I think because some people are just like, oh, let's just start something with two friends. If it goes somewhere, then it has a challenge. And I've seen a number of friends like, the friendship is gone, sadly at the end of it, because there's just something happened that trust was broken, and that's hard to recover from.
Yeah. So would you say that what I'm hearing is like communication is very important to communicate with them?
Communication is always important and always hard. Yeah. But yes. Yeah. And I think one great skill that, I think one thing that I was always very passionate about, and Scott was great at, is that we would disagree and commit, or have strong opinions loosely held. You hear that phrase a lot, but I think it's especially important in entrepreneurship, is that there's going to be times where you're going to really want to do something, and let your mind be okay with trying something. There would be times when there would be debates on things. We would both have a separate opinion on something. And part of it is just like sometimes you just got to, you listen to the evidence that the person shares, or have them present the evidence and see, like, does it change your mind? Does it not? Maybe it won't. And one thing that we did early on, one of our first like office, which was kind of a co-working space, had a foosball table, and we sometimes would bar with a foosball table. So we had a big debate. We'd say, okay, we go to the foosball table, and we would settle on the foosball table, one-on-one, and whoever won, that would be the idea that we went with. Because again, it's a way of breaking, with two 50-50 partners, you got to break a tie at points. And so I think the ability to have strong opinions loosely held is really important, and not take decisions too personally. And I would say I struggle with this. I think anyone struggles with this in the heat of the moment. Is a decision doesn't go your way, you might take it personally. Looking back, many moments that I did, it negatively affected me at times. So business shouldn't be personal in that sense, but I do think it does feel personal at times. And so I think you just have to kind of take that step back, take a deep breath. If you can't decide, like, it's better to commit and decide, and then see what happens and reevaluate.
If I don't agree with what my partner said, and if we both agree this is a way we're going to go, I would just commit and don't take it personal. That's your advice, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece. So Jeff Bezos has a really good structuring and phrasing around things of like two-way doors versus one-way doors. Most decisions that you make in business are two-way doors. And that means that, opens and closes. Like, you can go through and you can come back if it doesn't go well. There's certain decisions that are one-way doors. You go through that door, it's very hard to backtrack, to return. Once that door is closed or opened, you can't kind of change that decision. The majority of decisions that companies have are two-way doors. And I think this is a really important thing within entrepreneurship, and with designers, frankly, too, on products. Too many companies overemphasize two-way door decisions as one-way doors. And so they spend all this time, all this money debating, deciding something, where at the end of the day, it would just be better to make the best informed guess that you have with the information that you have today and go that way. Now, there are going to be certain decisions that are these one-way doors that are very big. And you need to then, in those cases, spend as much time as possible gathering as much evidence, as much information as possible to really make a very informed decision about which way you go. But you need to really make sure that it is a one-way door decision. And otherwise, be okay with a two-way door, and kind of, if it doesn't work out, just go back, change it, try something else the next time. That's how most things should be done.
Do you have any examples of a one-way door decisions?
Yeah, I think, for like early on, I'll be like, okay, well, there's a couple partners that we brought on that were, kind of, we couldn't afford their salaries. So we gave them equity in the business that was vested. That would be, a one-way door. Like, if it needs, like, that is a huge decision where you're giving away part of the business to people that you maybe have worked with in some sense, maybe you haven't even worked with them. And you need to make sure that they're really bought in, on, and they're a great addition to the team. They're going to drive the company forward and help you take it to the next level at the right point. In the Amazon example, as I said, Jeff Bezos is the one who really came up with this phrasing. Prime, I think, is a great example of the one-way door. Like, that was a big bet. Very hard once you offer customers free shipping. It's very hard to take away the free shipping from them, free 2-day shipping. So that's a very big bet that you have to make sure is going to work out economically, et cetera. And so I think these are, kind of the two-way doors. Now, on the flip side, it's like, okay, who should we decide as a services company? Who should we decide to target? How should we run our leadership meetings? How often should we run our leadership meetings? Two-way doors, right? You can try something today, next week, try something different. So evaluate how it's going, go back. Office space, getting an office space, big decision. You're signing a commitment for, a 7-10 year lease. Very hard to walk away from that. So make sure it's the right decision.
Yeah. And say, when you were starting the company back then, say if one-way door decisions was made maybe incorrectly and then things fall apart. When you started, have you ever thought about what would be at stake if you failed with your friend? Yeah,
we had put everything into this. I think in some ways there wasn't a lot at stake because we were both young people. We didn't have a family. We have families, but we didn't have a family. We did not have a lot of career pieces before us. So there wasn't a lot in terms of to fall back on. And that was negative and positive too. Like, okay, if we fail, then we're out of our only job that we have, really. But we don't have a lot of risk maybe of like, okay, if we fail with the big family, what does that mean? So I think there was those elements of it, but it was very much when we started we were moonlighting. I was still in college. He was at a job. We both had the job going. So we weren't really taking money. We saved up some extra money. And then we moved into, when I graduated, he had put in his notice. We moved into an apartment where the back was kind of our living quarters. The front was our office. So again, we had, a commitment of a little bit extra, but we weren't really paying ourselves that much. We had to just cover our monthly rent in essence. And then I think as we grew, then you have the commitments of the people that you hire. And those are people that you've made a commitment to. And so I think that was like, there was times when maybe we had to make a layoff, and that's tough. Like that is, I think that's where you feel that side of things of like, well, we've let these people down that have trusted us and joined our small team.
For someone who's say like wanted to start a business in their fees, or maybe they have more responsibilities they need to pay for, the spendings for the kids and education, food. Now that with more information available and also AI is going to help us a lot, how would you think that's going to affect them to start a business?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if I have the right answer, but we met for the people listening in. We met with a networking group called Punks and Pinstripes, and the founder of Punks and Pinstripes. One of the big things that he says a lot, and the research shows, is that the most success, like right now, the startup founders that are having the most success, they're getting the most funding, are older. They're in their 40s or in their 50s. So I think we hear a lot of the stories about the young tech kid entrepreneur, the Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera, that built this business when they were 23. But the reality is, as you get older, you have a lot more experience. You have a much bigger network to rely on. You've seen a lot more problems in the world. You know a lot more. You're much better suited to start a company than a 23-year-old kid is. So I think you have a lot more experience to go off of. You have a lot more network to maybe raise the money off of. But you, of course, you do have more risk to go with. So I would say, don't be afraid of that side of things. Now, in terms of how will you do that, I think, yes, you are probably not going to necessarily, you want to think about how can you validate your idea before you sink your family's life savings into this idea? Are you able to raise outside funding? Are you able to at least lower the risk? So it's not all you putting the risk in, Just remember, there's Elon Musk, richest man on the planet. He starts his new AI company, XAI. He raised a lot of money. He bought Twitter. He didn't personally buy all of Twitter. He raised money for it. He could afford it on his own. He could afford to fund XAI with his money, but he raised outside funds as part of that. So I think you think about, even if you have a lot of money, all the money in the world, how do you kind of de-risk it, right? You raise on outside investors, which also is good validation on the idea. You have to be able to tell that story. You have to paint that picture. So I think getting the outside validation is also very helpful before you launch the business. Now, you don't necessarily need to raise outside money, but I think you need to think about how can you validate your idea before you plow too much time and money into it. Can you prototype something using the AI tools? Maybe you're not personally doing all of it, but can you put a little bit of money in, prototype something, get those first sales? Like, how can you de-risk something before you go full bore into this product and burn all the bridges? I mean, that's what I would recommend. I think there's a lot of risk taker entrepreneurs out there that would say, fuck it, let's just go and put everything in. And sure, that is a way of doing it. I personally would try to say, how can I put a little bit of money in to validate this, to learn a little bit from the market, even if I'm not raising money, if it's my money, but like, how do I push this to the next level? There are ways to learn those things.
I also saw that you were teaching front development at General Assembly. I think my question for you is, should designers code?
Well, I think even beyond teaching, I think designers should understand code. There's many types of designers, right? But if you are a digital designer who's building software, it is a big advantage to understand code, to understand how code works and how software works and is built. Do you need to write the end front end code? Not necessarily. And today it's a lot easier to do all of this with the AI tools. Do you need to? No, probably not. But I do think that the generalist skill and at least understanding the language of software is very valuable, because the more that you can tell the story, the closer to the end deliverable, the better, right? It makes it more realistic. We used to tell ideas on PowerPoint decks. Then we were able to get into a prototype in Figma, or before that InVision. And now you can actually get something into working code relatively quickly. That's a lot better. That's a lot more realistic. You want to do a user interview? Well, it's a lot more realistic to click on a piece of software that feels like a real piece of software than to do it in a Figma prototype. So not 100% necessary, but I think a big advantage. And I think, especially in the world of AI, I think it's going to unlock a lot of possibilities for designers. So I would strongly recommend, knowing the basics, enough to get hands dirty and at least in these days to know how to use like Cursor or some of these AI coding tools.
Do you have other AI coding tools that on the top of the mind that you think it'd be worth a try?
Well, I mean, when this episode comes out, we might be new ones that we haven't seen before, right? So I think Cursor is our like go to IED. It's like it's like the interface to edit code, writing code, just like a word processor, but it's writing software. And Cursor is a great AI-powered tool on top of one of those IDEs. There's also some other ones that are very popular right now that I think are pretty powerful and great to see, that are kind of more one-shot with some iteration. So there's Bolt, which is a way to, again, type in a prompt to get a full stack application. So it's not as much the the coding interface. You can then take that code and put it into a cursor, for example. There's Lovable, that also, similar to Bolt, has that kind of capability. Replit has their kind of tooling around building out, softwares and deploying it in these kind of lightweight ways. Replit's a really great platform as well for deploying code. I think it has some training pieces built into it as well, so you can learn to code a little bit. And there's always, there's new ones coming out. GitHub Copilot is getting more powerful. You can always just ask ChatGPT. A lot of people are liking asking ChatGPT for things, and maybe even copying and pasting that into Cursor. So there's lots of, I think, neat ways in the past year that have really accelerated the ability to build things that are in designers' mind a lot more quickly. That are worth looking at. Oh, and then another one that I think designers will really like is V0 by Versal, which really helps on, you can design the interface and then get the front end code for it.
From your teaching experience, what is your expectation for your students? What would be the bare minimum they should do at your class so that you don't feel like you're not spending a worthwhile time teaching?
I think in general with anything, just to zoom it back outside even the class, but I think with any design or anything is I want people who are curious, and I want people who try. I want people to put in a good effort. And I think that, if someone just goes through the motions, like copies it down from the board or copies it down and doesn't even try to solve the problem. One of the beauties with coding, I think that's very fun, which I always liked, is you plug something in, you type something, and then you pull up the browser, you see if it works, or if you see if it looks like you expected it to look like. It's very binary. You know what is it supposed, especially if you're coding front end, like I have a design that I'm trying to bring into a thing. Is it what you want? Or in software engineering, if a feature works or not. So part of that is you have to be, you're going to run into problems that you can't solve on the first go. And I don't want you as, just ask a teacher for it. Like try a little bit, test it, see how do you solve this thing, and ask ChatGPT, which wasn't around when I was teaching the class, but go on Stack Overflow. Try a couple things based on what and see, just test things, do that kind of guess and check thing that we talked about at the very beginning. And I think that's a great way of learning, because you start to see what works, what doesn't work. And if you can't solve it, ask someone or go for a walk and then come back, and you'll probably get it after you go for the walk.
What worries you about design education?
I think I noticed, at UCLA, right, with design, it was not very commercial. I think the big thing goes back to what we talked about on the business case side of things. There's not enough thought about the business, and you want the seat at the table. You need to understand, you got to get out of the preachy mindset, and there's a little too much emphasis on process and not as much emphasis on outcomes. And at the end of the day, everyone's in the results business. It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or a startup or a big enterprise. People care about results. They want to see results. You're only as good as the last project that you did. And you have to be able to tell that story about the results. And you have to understand that if someone is telling you they're like, just build this feature, there's a reason there. You need to empathize with the stakeholders, just like you empathize with the users. And sometimes I feel that, designers get a little too preachy amongst themselves, and they don't necessarily take their same skills that they're so great about empathizing with end users and empathize with the business users, the stakeholders at your organization, to understand what do they need? What are they being judged on? And is that maybe the reason that they're telling you to do something that you don't want to do? And how do you combine those worlds? So I think we really need designers to know more about the business, understand the business, and think about how what they do impacts the business. I think is very important and not taught enough.
Can you give an example of what preachy looks like in real life? Because if I do that, I want to be able to identify that I'm doing that.
The process says we have to speak with 5 users at this point. Then we have to build personas. We have to do customer journey mapping. We have to do a prototype in 1 week. We have to interview 5 people. No, you need to be a little more flexible, right? Or a business person told me, I just want to build this thing. And you say, no, we have to test this thing. Again, not to say that there isn't, I've been a long proponent, right, of testing and doing the research. But again, understand why are they saying that, understand their confidence level. And maybe you still need to do that test. But don't just always spit back with, we have to go back to the same exact process. Be flexible, be adaptive, understand the constraints of the business, and see, does it make sense to do what someone is saying, or does it make sense to push back a little bit?